I've made it to the end of my growing season for this year. And I consider this to sort of be coming into the end of the year for me, even though we're coming into the middle of the calendar year. But here in the Southern Hemisphere, the middle of the calendar year is the end of the growing season, so that's my end of the year. I thought you might like to see what tasks I get up to at the end of the season to help set things up for next season based in an ecological gardening and farming context. The main task that I like to do once I've cleared the plants out of the bed, which the chickens help me with, is to get lots and lots of horse manure onto the top of those beds so it's got its time to work its magic until the next growing season. So that's my first and main task. I like to assess how things have gone as I'm removing those old plants and getting ready for a reset of the garden. I like to think about how have they grown, is it been good, has it been bad, and what nutrients I might need to add into the soil to fix any issues that I may have had. This is also the time that I plan my cover crop rotation through my growing beds here. And it is the time that I get my in-garden worm farming system up and running, which I take through the winter time. But the main thing that I like to get done is using my chicken flock to pretty much do all the heavy lifting for me. So let's go have a look at how I make that happen. My chicken flock do pretty much all the heavy lifting at this time of year for me. All I need to do is give them access to the gardens once I'm ready to change over and put in whatever it is I want to spread on the garden. And that's pretty much all I need to do. They do all the rest and they do it really well. I have just taken the net off this garden and the chickens were circling. They knew what was happening and they're going to jump up in here and they're going to knock back all of this crazy overgrown vegetation, which is how I garden and how every garden bed ends up looking by the end of the season. They're going to knock it back and then I'm going to be able to come back in 1 or 2 days and see any plants that they've not been able to get out. They will have loosened the soil up around them. It's easy for me just to pull those plants out and then they can clear the entire garden down to essentially nothing. And while they're busy doing that, they are gobbling up all the little seeds that have been dropped and they are clearing up insect pests as well. So they're doing an excellent job for me setting up for the next season. Once the chickens have cleared the garden down to essentially nothing, they've cleared out all of the plants, all I do there is I bring a garden cart full of horse manure and I just shovel it out on the top. I don't spread it out, I just dump it in a pile on top of the garden bed and I walk away. And what they're going to do is they're going to spread that all out. They're going to gobble up any insects that have been in the horse manure and they're going to do a pretty decent job of clearing out a lot of the weed seeds that are in that horse manure, because that is the negative to using horse manure, is the digestive system of horses does not clear out weed seeds and it can be quite a lot of weed that you get in your garden the next season if you use it. While the chickens are turning in all that manure and spreading it for me, I can also add in any nutrients I need to put in. In my case, it's usually more calcium and I usually pop in a little bit of seaweed just to be distributed, and I don't have to do anything other than throw it out on top of the pile and the chickens are going to dig it all in for me. They're also going to add their own fertilizer to the mix while they're cruising around doing their job. And they're absolutely essential for my cover crop rotation system. So let's have a look at how I use cover crops to hold nutrients in the soil and also reduce my weed seed burden. Here I have the beginning of my cover crop rotation. So this is just my garden bed and I have set this one up to be an in-bed worm farm. So I've moved some worms from my worm nursery and put them in here on top of all that horse manure, which the chickens haven't been allowed to go in and do. I spread this one myself and it's going to kick off the system. So what I've got happening under here, this is just some shade cloth over the top, is all of the seeds that have been dropped by all the plants that went to seed, and also any seed that has been in the horse manure is starting to germinate. Now, I'm going to let this cruise up to a certain point, and at that point I'm going to briefly let the chickens cruise through, and they're going to dig all of these up, and then they're dead. They're not going to continue to be weeds further into the year for me. And then I'm going to cover it back over again, and the same will happen. The next round of seeds will germinate. I'll let the chickens through briefly to knock them back. The chickens are getting a little bit of food, and I'm getting the weed burden just knocked out over the season, and it means in the springtime I'm going to have way less issues with weeds when I'm trying to put in my early season crops. So this is a very specific system that I'm only running on this one bed because I want to maintain a lot of worms in here, so the chickens can't have too much time on this. But with my other beds, what I do is once the chickens have spread all the manure and I've given them a couple of weeks to play in the garden as their reward for all their hard work, I cover that garden bed up so the chickens can't get to it, just pop a net over it, and I let the seeds germinate. Give that 3-4 weeks, I let the chickens in, they knock it back, I cover it again, seeds germinate, chickens go back in. So I don't have to sow down any specific cover crop seed I've had to buy. I just let whatever seeds are already present in the horse manure and from the plants that have gone to seed that I've been growing. So lots of lettuces and beets and things like that come up. The chickens have some food, some nice green food in the off season, which is good for them. And I have very little weed pressure coming into springtime. So that just rotates its way around. The chickens always have full access to 2 or 3 garden beds at any one time, and they're restricted away from 2 or 3 of them at any one time. And that just gives me lots of choices to pivot at any point in time if I want to make a different decision. The garden bed is always pretty much ready to go. That is how I manage my garden system here once the season has ended. The chickens are really, really useful, and I highly recommend using them to help you with your own garden system. If you're interested in seeing more detail about how I do my cover crop rotation system, let me know in the comments.